Good evening, everyone. Last night I spoke to you about why I'm going to Washington, D.C., why the passion to be involved in prison reform and to be involved in the lives of inmates. And tonight I want to begin to talk about some of the things that I'm going to discuss when I'm there. So, my proposal for prison reform is about compelling inmates to pursue recovery, to pursue healing in their life, to pursue change that is genuine and is going to bring them home, and they're going to succeed. And so, my what I'm calling for in my inmate development and reform proposal is that for a particular group of inmates, parole would no longer be on the table. That when they got sentenced to 5 years or 7 years or 3 years or whatever it is, you got 3 years or you got 5 years. There is no parole. And that's where the compelling part of what I'm proposing kicks in. Because what I have proposed is a personal development initiative that includes 5 blocks, which are emotional, social, physical, spiritual, and professional change and reform. For every initiative they complete, they would reduce their exposure to custodial time. If they were to complete the entire program, more than likely, those individuals are going to have a great chance at succeeding when they come home. But I'm kind of, I would like to see them move away from the inmate getting such a big reduction in time for just being good, because guess what, when you come home you have to be good, but you're not going to get a trophy for it. I'm about compensating or rewarding the inmate for what he or she would accomplish. Now, when I went to prison all the way back in 1983, I got off that bus and I remember vividly the words that CO spoke to us as we stood there in a line shackled together. He said, "You are not here to be rehabilitated. You are here to be punished." And those words reflect entirely my prison experience, which is punishment. Now, fast forward 3 years, I go to the parole board. I sit down in front of, I don't know how many people were there. It was a lot of people. And they go, "Mr. Palumbi, if you saw the Shawshank Redemption, you could appreciate this. Why do you consider yourself to be rehabilitated?" And I'm looking at him and I just kind of pause and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? 3 years ago, when I got off the bus, you told me I was here to be punished, not to be rehabilitated. But trust me, I had a lot of reasons why they should let me go. And ultimately they did. They let me go. But to go back to this proposal and where I feel like I differ from the First Step Act, and something I'm going to talk to the congressman about, is that they're really leaning heavy towards, you know, giving inmates an education, giving inmates a trade skill. And I kind of feel like that should be the last thing they're going to be doing. And I'm going to explain why. Yesterday, you might remember me saying that when I went to prison, I had a trade skill. I had an education. I went to prison because I was broken. I was a broken man. And studies show that trauma is, more often than not, the root cause of antisocial criminal behavior. There is a major link between child abuse, trauma, and criminal behavior, drug addiction. Now, let me just clarify what child abuse is. The federal law, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, says that child abuse is, and I'm kind of, just telling you in my own words, but you can look it up. Child abuse is any action or inaction by a parent or a caretaker that leads to the death, the physical harm, the emotional harm, or the sexual harm of a child. So when you look at child abuse through that lens, there a lot of children, most inmates, are living in environments with intergenerational violence. And when I say violence, I mean I grew up in a home, and my family doesn't like me talking about it, but this is for the benefit of other people. I grew up in a home where things were smashed, things were broken, physical discipline was extremely harsh. Words that were spoken were extremely harsh. You don't grow up in those kinds of environments and not be impacted in a negative way by it. It's just a fact of life. And it's not me saying it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not any of these things. These are my observations after having reflected on my life, having gone to prison, having spent time with inmates all over the country. And in my daily life, I spend a lot of time with drug addicts and guys who have been in prison. And at the end of the day, when we get down to the nitty gritty of everything, there's injury in their life. And whether that injury was their father was not there, or their father was abusive, or their father wasn't there and their mother used drugs, and there was all kinds of things going on in the home. But this intergenerational dysfunction, in other words, the dysfunction of parents being passed down generation to generation, is the root cause of addiction. So a lot of times I say, look, my victim status led to my offender status. And this is where I'm saying change needs to begin. Inmates need to deal with unaddressed trauma in their life. Then the job, and then the education. But until they address until the unaddressed trauma is addressed, that job and that the education or the trade skill, that's not going to guarantee that recidivism is going to go down. But I can tell you this: when you deal with injury in your life and you let go of it, it no longer controls you. It never controls how you respond, how you think, the lens through which you see the world through. It all changes. And so in that respect, that approach, dealing with unaddressed trauma, which is what I'm calling for here in my inmate development and reform proposal, is that inmates would be compelled to address what they haven't addressed. And there's some people that disagree with me. They say, no, prison's not the environment for that. You don't deal with unaddressed trauma in the prison environment, because the fact of the matter is prison, the environment of prison itself, is a trigger to anybody who's experienced trauma, because you're leaving that home that was harsh and cold and no genuine examples of love and intimacy, and now you're coming into another harsh environment of prison, and the authority in the prison and the discipline in the prison and the different things in the prison are triggers of that trauma you experienced at home or under the care of a caregiver. So I don't necessarily agree that prison's not the place to do it, because if it doesn't happen there, more than likely it's not going to happen when they come home. They're going to come home with that new education, they're going to come home with that new trade skill, but they're also going to come home with layers of injury from serving time in prison, heaped on top of the injury they entered prison with to begin with. So I feel like the trauma, the abuse, whatever you want to call it, it needs to be dealt with while they're in prison. And so in saying that, I'm also saying that the environment needs to be created for that to happen for these people. And I know there's the negative attitudes out here in society, like they don't deserve it, they're criminals, why are we going to waste our money on them? Here's the reality of it. Remember what I said yesterday: 85% of inmates go back to prison. So you're paying either way. We're going to be paying for these people to spend the rest of their life in prison. Why don't we spend money to heal these people, to come out into the community, to be good role models, to succeed and to contribute to our communities, because they are coming home. So I'm not going to go on much more about the emotional aspect of my personal development initiatives, but that would be where I begin. I would begin with unaddressed trauma with the inmates, and next I would move in to their social health, their poor social health. That really is the result of their poor emotional health. So I'm going to throw that out at you. That's where I'm going with some of this, and I would love to hear your comments, your experiences, or what you think about what I'm saying. But I don't really believe that we begin with the education and the trade skill as much as we begin with healing what's broken, so that when we add in the trade skill and the education, it's going to be much more powerful for that person. So thank you. Good night, and I look forward to hearing your comments.